Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Dan Bromberg. I'm the Director of Academic Programs for the Carsey School of Public Policy, and I'm joined today with Michael Ettlinger, the Director of the Carsey School for Public Policy. And we're just going to have a quick conversation about a couple of the courses that Michael teaches and that Michael's involved with, a little bit about the more general curriculum. But we're doing a series where we're trying to tackle all of our courses. So throughout this semester, the fall, I'll be chatting with a few of our other faculty members just to help our students and potential students get an idea of the types of courses that we offer. One of the areas that we focus on is experiential learning, and we do that through a few different avenues. We do that through our Capstone process, which is a culminating project towards the end of an MPP student's experience with us. We do that with an internship, which could happen throughout the time frame. And then we also do that with our Washington, D.C. trip. And our Washington, D.C. trip is really, it's a fundamental part of the MPP curriculum. And students really gear up to that after their semester. So during their first semester in our program, students take both their quantitative methods class and their economics class, along with a fundamentals of public policy class. They'll then take also an elective during that semester, typically. And those four classes really give them a pretty strong foundation to then go to that next step and take that Washington, D.C. Colloquium, which is our first point of experiential learning for our students. Michael leads that class. He takes the students down to DC. They prep prior to going to DC and then do a good amount of follow-up after the trip to DC. So Michael, I'm hoping that we could kind of start with the Washington, DC trip. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the structure of the class and how that works to get us started.
Yes. Yeah, so we do, when we're in so it's 3-week class because it's January term or a couple of days less than 3 weeks. And the way when we're in DC, we do about 25 meetings in 5 days. So it's really go, go, go. But the week before, what we do is we prep for the meetings so that different students are assigned to different meetings to make sure that we have a good, solid conversation, although any student can get involved and ask questions in any of the meetings. And the first week is just sort of like, who are we visiting? What is their expertise? What do they do? What's their job? Just so we're prepared and can get the most out of the meetings while we're in DC. In DC, we do all these meetings, and it's really with, a huge variety of people. The idea is to get the whole DC experience in a week to the extent that's possible. So we do meetings at embassies. We met with the French ambassador. We've been to the German embassy. We've done White House meetings. We've done always do Capitol Hill meetings. We have agency meetings, Department of Commerce. We've gone to the Pentagon, I think, every year, been to the State Department. So there's that like governmental side, but then very much on the advocacy, research, think tank, lobbyist side as well. So we meet with big time corporate lobbyists who we try to get to buy us a meal. We meet with, we've been to the ACLU, we meet with labor unions, we meet with communication, like political communication firms, think tanks, as I said, so both conservative, progressive, Cato. I mean, I could go down the list. So let me get the full DC range of experience was the idea. Yeah, Dan?
So to jump in for a second, I mean, there are a bunch of different programs that, build kind of a DC something into their, curriculum. Some of them might do, a Washington Center type trip, which, these are kind of programs that are I would almost say more generic in certain senses. Students from different universities come to them. So how does this differentiate from something like that?
Well, I would say I'll just speak to what ours does, which is, one, these are small meetings. We get a good hunk of the time. They're people who we have like a real relationship with. So we do this all under kind of cone of silence, right? I mean, it's there. All the meetings are treated as confidential. So, I think we get a lot of real insight from people. They're real honest about things. I mean, honestly, I was really surprised when we met with the French ambassador a couple of years, how candid he was. So I think there's a lot of candor in these meetings. We get real time with them. I mean, and also I just say the range of things, like a lot of the other programs, at least, I can't speak to all of them, but the ones I know about, they're actually, I led off with listing all the government agency type of meetings, and like government agencies are kind of pro forma for these sorts of things and Hill meetings, but the access we've had, in terms of the White House, the State Department's like very high level meetings, and but also getting out of the marble buildings, if you were, and meeting the people who are just like advocates, and that's what they do. They try to figure out how to get government to do stuff, either the nonprofit like left or right-wing advocacy movements, or people who work for Fortune 100 companies and handle all their lobbying and just I think and to the political side. I mean, we have people who do nothing but politics as well, and I think the breadth of the kind of introduction you get to really what the DC experience is about is one thing that distinguishes it. And it sort of reflects. I was in DC for lots of years before I came to the University of New Hampshire, and a lot of it reflects like a philosophy I bring to this program, which is that people in their careers won't work in all of those areas, but if you're going to be effective in public policy, you need to be exposed to all that and at least be conversant in how all that works, because all those pieces interact in the way public policy is made.
Yeah, great. So I know, after the week in DC, students write a number of different reflective type assignments. I'm curious if you could talk to us about, what resonates with those students when you're reading those papers. Anything stand out, kind of across different students, different cohorts, things like that?
Actually, it's only one assignment. The third week is the easy part of this class. The first week is a little bit intense preparing, and when we're in DC, we're just on the run the whole time. So it's a bit of a marathon, but it goes well. It's good. But anyway, so we do have a reflective essay at the end, and I generally ask, a couple of things. One is just kind of how it made people think differently about what they want to do. And it's interesting. I mean, some people, I can honestly say, the experience changed their perspective on what they want to do in their careers. Because, people some students get exposed to jobs they never even thought about, right? Or just learn more about what it's really like to do a whole bunch of these different things. So, so there's a lot of, so that's one thing. And then the other piece is more open-ended about, what are some things that stood out to you in meetings? And some of that is just some of the people we meet with are super impressive, and you get that. But, I think one thing people get an appreciation for is that, like, the people we meet with, they're in, like, big jobs and big positions, but they put on their pants one leg at a time, as the saying goes. I mean, they're just people. They come from a wide variety of backgrounds. And just, I think it sort of humanizes it for a lot of the students, and they realize, yeah, they too could succeed in this world, and they could navigate DC or a state capital or, whatever their ambition is.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think, chatting with some of our students after the fact, just to give some specific examples, I've heard, a handful of students now, probably, two or three that really had law school on their mind prior to going to DC. They thought they might get their MPP and then, go along to law school. And when they came back from DC, they realized they could actually play a pretty substantial role with that MPP in hand and engage in policymaking, advocacy, development, whatever it might be, without that law degree. And I think that was always, enlightening for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of paths into the policy world. I mean, law is one. It's it's actually the path I took, but there are a lot of paths.
Yeah. So Michael, you also teach one of our core classes, Strategy and Practice of Public Policy. And in the timeline of the program, it typically happens right after the DC trip. So DC is during our January term, and then our spring semester starts towards the end of January, and that's when your class picks up. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your Strategy of Public Policy class, and if it ties into the DC trip, or if not, just what you try to cover in that class.
Yeah, I mean I'm not sure I'd say ties in, but a lot of times, we do reference back to people we met there, but not all the students in my class were on DC. So they're not entirely integrated, but, you can clearly see students who are in DC bring that into the class. I sort of felt like the program needed just to put things into a structure to some extent. It's a mixture of putting things into a structure, like how does policy really get made, which in DC, it's just, you hear from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And the idea of this class is to just run a mixture of just kind of running through the steps in, like, how do you make change happen, with a little bit more of a, inside the beltway focus. We have other classes that are more oriented towards, like, grassroots organizing type approach. This is more of, how do think tanks, advocacy groups, how do people who work in legislatures, how do those, like, how do politics and policy interact? What's the decision-making processes about what policies get advanced, what don't, what makes things happen. So there's some of it's like, about that structure and the steps. And then a bunch of it is experiential, sort of, we create simulations. So almost every week we do a simulated meeting once a week for an hour, where it depends on the class, but we'll pretend we're like a conservative think tank, and we'll look at what's been happening in the news, and we'll talk about, as if we were a conservative think tank, how would we be reacting to that? What would we be, what products would we be producing? What would we be writing? What would our positions be? Or, we'll do a progressive think tank, or we'll pretend we're, a congressional office. We'll do that. And we just sort of like it's sort of to develop muscle memory about how people in these positions think about what's happening and how to address it. And then to a large degree, the course is structured around, typically we do 3 mock Senate hearings. So we pick 3 different policy areas, and half the students play senators and half the students play witnesses, roughly, with assigned roles. And then we bring in somebody, usually from DC, although it hasn't been in every case, who's an actual expert in whatever the topic area is. So we've had a hearing on immigration, and we bring in one of the top immigration experts in the country to come be chairwoman in that case, of the committee for that. And so they help run the hearing. And then afterwards, we just sort of have a conversation about how the hearing went, and that person gives their perspective on the issues. So that's the basic structure of that class.
So do you find that the students take those simulations seriously? Do you find like they actually get into their roles and play them, kind of in an effective, serious manner?
Yeah, and that's sort of part of the rule too. It's like, we all know each other, so it's easy to get jokey or, and to sort of lose discipline on it. But, we dress up, we act like it's we really do. I mean, afterwards we talk about it more loosely, but during the actual hearing, we ask, tough questions of the witnesses, right? And really, you know, take it seriously.
So, Michael, we have a few questions coming in. One of them is from Brandon Feeney. And what Brandon's asking is, do any of the classes offer debate on policy issues? So, talking about these simulations, I mean, is that what, are we seeing some debate in your class around specific policy issues?
Yeah.
Does that come into play?
No, I would say a couple things about that. First of all, it's just in the course of the class, we're always having discussions about what's happening in the policy, world. And we inevitably end up with discussions about that, and give and take. So, there's sort of an informal debate. In terms of that sort of weekly hour that we spend, it's more we all play a role and we sort of develop what the arguments in that role would be made, in the debate context. So we may be conservative, we may be regressive, but it's like it's getting our heads around how we would craft a message and how we would engage in the debate. And certainly the hearings, are kind of all about that. Again, within roles. One of the things I actually think is important about the class is students inevitably end up in roles that they both agree with and disagree with. And I think that being in roles you don't agree with, I think has two virtues. One is just, I think it sensitizes you to the fact that people on the other side aren't always as insane as, we might sit around in our bubbles and think they are, because you put yourself in their shoes. But the other is I actually think it makes you better at advocating your point of view by stepping into the other role, because it's sort of, you end up sort of processing what the strengths of the other side's arguments are, and that makes you better at debating on the other side. So
you're great. I think that's super helpful. So I think, just to put this in context for everyone. So Michael's class is one of two core classes that are offered during the spring semester. We also offer our Policy Across Borders class, which is more of a foreign policy class. And then there's also, a couple of electives that are typically offered during the spring semester. So really we're building you up towards the culmination. What you would do is then after that May, typically you might get an intern over the summer. And then you might be left with an elective class in your capstone. So our students typically they start in September, and they typically finish the following December. So about a full 3 semesters, maybe with a summer in there in between. So thank you, Michael. I think that's very, very helpful for everyone to get a sense of both the DC trip and your class in the spring semester. If there are any questions, Michael and I are around to answer them. It looks like we do have another question from Brandon. I'm a former state representative, and I'm wondering if my service and experience in public office would exclude me from needing to complete the DC portion. It's a good question, Brandon. There are certainly conversations we could have on an individual basis. Typically our students really appreciate the DC trip, even if they do have, experience in public policy. And actually some of our more experienced students, get more out of that trip, because to some degree they kind of have a sense of the ecosystem a little bit and are able to dive in a little bit deeper. Go ahead, Michael.
I just say we've had 2 state reps take the DC trip, and they actually really appreciated it. And look, I was in DC for a long time working in public policy, and I enjoyed the meetings and the trips. So I guess, whether we'd waive it or whatever, I don't know. But I would recommend against it, because even if you were to state, we're in government and did have high level meetings, it's a real opportunity to meet with, a whole bunch of people at the top of their profession and specifically be talking about kind of how they think about their work, which is, one reason why I find it interesting is because, I was in DC for 25 years. You rarely actually have that conversation, you just do the business. So anyway, I would, whatever we end up doing just from a requirement standpoint, my recommendation would be that I think almost anybody would get something out of the trip.
Yeah, these meetings typically look like about 10 to 15 minutes of just understanding how that person got to that position. Then they talk a good amount about how they're positioned within the policy ecosystem in DC, and talk about how they go about achieving their goals. And then there's a good amount of time for our students to ask questions. And really, our students can kind of dig into policy issues in a way that, you typically wouldn't have that type of access. So they're pretty impressive and a really great experience.
We have another
Any
question.
Other questions out there?
Yep. About, I guess, the media strategy and skills, the difference between strategy and practice of public policy course and other related courses such as media strategy and skills and strategies for policy impact.
Yeah. So I would say I think I don't have all the names of the classes in my head, but I think there's this fall class that's an elective. If I have this right, Dan, just correct me. Yeah. And I would say it is much more focused on kind of advocate, like organization and advocacy and to some extent messaging, like from a more outsider perspective. You building power mapping and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit more external advocacy focused, if you will. Whereas, external meaning like more grassroots, like maybe the better word is more grassrootsy, and integrating that. I mean, it does have stuff about how do you integrate that with a more inside strategy, but it's a little more of that focus. And it's a little more like, how do you build the overall strategy from that standpoint? The media course is much more, directly about media. And some of it's very nuts and bolts, like how do you handle a media interview, and a lot about, really a focus in on messaging. And then my class is more about, like in some ways, bigger picture about how policy and politics interact and how people like working on Capitol Hill or working in a state legislature or working as policy advocates, how those two intersect. There's a lot of attention on that. And it's more like focusing on how do you prepare and advocate in a hearing, for example, sort of more through the formal structures and less about, how do you create an organizing campaign to get to a hearing and get passage. So.
Yeah, good. And I think that touches on Brandon's other question, which is, does this program delve into the legislative process of public policy, or is it meant to cultivate a grassroots policy movement?
Mine is more about, we don't get into, parliamentary rules, but yeah, my class is much more about sort of like, assume a bill has been introduced, like, how do you if you're sort of, in a state capital or in DC, how do you build support for legislation externally and internally? How do you engage in public messaging? How do you persuade people? within a legislative body, within an executive branch? How do you leverage outside support for that? That's more the focus of my class, which of course draws on these other classes too. Communication strategies obviously can be a big part of that. Yeah. So.
There's another question from another attendee. What are the general rules with regard to international students?
The general rules. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I would say that the general rules are essentially, we admit international students on a regular basis. I would say, if not all of our cohorts, almost all of our cohorts have had students, international students. They work with our international students office and work through the visa process. And they're evaluated just as any of our other students are, as far as their admittance into the program. Frankly, it's always great to get kind of these broader international perspectives in our classrooms. So it's certainly something we welcome and we encourage.
Yeah, I will just say I do like to be honest. Like this is not an international relations program. And it does have a U.S., focus. That's who the faculty, like me, have a background in for the most part. So that's, but I'll also say that, the international students we've had, I would say have felt like they got a lot out of the program, which actually to be totally candid, when we first started up this program, I was a little bit skeptical that they would get a lot out of it and was not hugely encouraging of international students participating. But they really, I think, I don't know if every single one of them, but by and large, certainly the ones I can think of all actually were quite, happy with what they got out of it and felt like it had applicability to where they were from and the work they planned on doing.
Yeah. And, just to go back to that question as far as the, is there work on the legislative side or the grassroots side? So you're more than welcome to ask as many questions as you'd like. That's why we're here. So I think, as Michael said, right, it does touch on all of those aspects, right? I mean, part of this is to give you that foundation. Our students end up doing a little bit of everything, frankly. We have students who are running, who are communications directors for, advocacy organizations. We have students that are staffers in both state houses and at the federal level. I think we have students in, our entire delegations offices. So our students end up, in positions that both touch on that grassroots, advocacy policy movement component and also the legislative component. And our goal is to give them, a broad enough base that they're able to do both of those things and be successful.
Yeah, and I just want to slightly reiterate something I already said. I really do believe now more than ever that to be effective in any of these roles, or at least to be the most effective, it's important to understand all of the roles because they all do interact and matter. And it's just that is much more true than it used to be.
So the DC colloquium, there's a question: does the DC capstone replace a thesis requirement? So there is not a thesis requirement for the MPP program. There's a capstone requirement, and they're different. And we could talk about that briefly, but the DC trip is completely separate. So there are 3 experiential learning opportunities: an internship, the capstone, and the DC trip. Someone's experience in the policymaking world can waive the internship. So that is something that we do frequently. If someone has that experience, we waive the internship. The capstone and the colloquium, we typically do not. And the capstone's a policy-based project. And we could kind of get into the details of that. But, typically these are pretty applied policy work. And you work with an expert in the field to accomplish that task. And that's not something that's ever waived. The capstone is, a required component of the program.
That's all the questions I see. Unless you see additional ones there. Brandon, more? Any more questions?
I thought I saw Brandon ask about the, this might apply to other people too. Yeah, the internship program. I mean, we do sometimes waive the internship requirement for students who have extensive experience, in public policy or some related field.
Okay, so well, first, thanks everyone for jumping on with us. We love doing these, and we're going to be doing a few more of these throughout the semester. I'll be on with Mike Nikitas, who teaches our media class. I'll be on with him towards the end of October, and I'll be on with Carolyn Arkand in middle October to talk about her course. She'll be talking about policy and care work. So kind of a political economy course, care economy is what it's called. It'll obviously be related to COVID a bit the next semester. So we're looking forward to that. We will follow up with everyone. We'll send you, a quick note to follow up, and you're welcome to reach out to any of us if you have any further questions that you want to ask about. So we look forward to hearing from all of you, and thanks everyone for joining us. Take care.